Over the years, I've been collecting a lot of paper notes whilst watching historical documentaries or any kind of documentary on YouTube late at night. I find it's just a lovely way to wind down the day. Now, to make these sessions a little bit more meaningful for me, what I've usually done is I've kept a little notebook with me, and of course the obligatory pen, and I've just collected notes. Now, one of the things that I do, and particularly in this book that I do, is any podcast interview that I can watch on YouTube, I would just grab lots of little notes from what I've seen. So in this particular notebook, which is a Midori Traveler's Notebook, this is the original size. This is a video podcast that I watched on Gunther Steiner and on the High Performance podcast. And I collected a lot of notes. Now, I could show you these from an overhead camera, but you probably won't be able to read my writing. But it's not really the point of the information that I'm collecting. It's more about the information that you collect. Now, this little notebook here is ideal because it's got a reasonably hard leather cover. And I can just keep this on my lap, and with my pen I can just take notes. So I've got one here from Christian Horner. I think I must have been going through my Formula One version there. Oh yes, Toto Wolff here of Mercedes. And then going on here, I've got one by Rory Sutherland. Now, Rory Sutherland is the vice chairman of Ogilvy, which is an advertising agency, and there was a lot of useful information there. Now, as I go through this, I find a lot of information that I've collected in this particular notebook on the interviews that I've done. Now, this goes back to last year, but it's still an incredibly useful resource. So this was Andrew Huberman and David Goggins, which is just an amazing interview if you want to look up that one. But this actually, from here, the notes that I collected actually ended up as a blog post that I wrote not so long ago. So this is a normal navy blue leather-bound traveler's notebook. Now, over the last few months, I've been using a slightly different one because this is an endless A5 notebook. Now, normally I prefer B5 notebooks. They're a little bit bigger and I write my journal in those. But again, these are ideal because what I can do is, and what I usually do is, when I finish here in the office late at night, because I'm doing coaching calls, I grab my pen, stick it in the elastic there, and go through into the house. And then I usually spend an hour and a half doing some kind of studying on YouTube because we've got the big TV screen in the living room and I can just sit there with a glass of water and I can just take notes. Now, this particular notebook is very interesting because this is not interviews. These have been the things that I've studied. Now, I keep at the front, as a good Commonplace notebook user does do, is I've created a little index of all the things that I've been watching. So this goes back to the beginning of February. So I started off with a digital minimalism philosophy video. I've done John Churchill, who was the Duke of Marlborough, Albert Einstein, the Dalai Lama, Maya Angelou, Tim Ferriss's morning routine, Isaac Newton, Alan Turing and Bletchley Park, decoding Leonardo da Vinci, Nixon in the Den, which is all about how Richard Nixon would hide away in his office in the White House. I've got Clement Attlee, who was the post-war Labour Prime Minister for the UK. I've got the dark side of the Renaissance, and so on and so forth. I mean, it is completely random in here. And all I'm doing as I'm I'm using different colored inks because I love my fountain pens. But you'll see in here that I've done, oh, this is Gladstone and Disraeli. I've got my green inks here. There's some stuff on Alan Watts, who's a spiritual philosopher. I have collected a ton of stuff. Here's the Leonardo da Vinci notes. I mean, I have collected a ton of stuff over the years. I've even been drawing little sketches in these notebooks when I'm doodling, and this was when I was watching a video on the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the thing about this, and they do have a formal name, is they are called Commonplace notebooks. Now, if you do a search on Commonplace notebooks here on YouTube, you're going to find a lot of beautifully designed books. Books that have obviously people have spent hours and hours and hours of designing. Now for me, my Commonplace notebook is nothing to do with the design. I don't care. I mean, I'm just grabbing notes of interest. But what I find surprising is if I'm writing a blog post or if I'm working on a project or even creating a video like this, I will often come back to these notebooks looking for inspiration, and they really are inspiration. I've got one here on the Vatican and the Nazis. I mean, how am I ever going to need that information in the future? But who knows, because I learnt about Pope Pius XII and how he was conflicted between not having the Nazis or the fascists in Italy overrunning the Vatican City and also protecting Catholics in Europe where the Nazis were overrunning the countries. So it was an amazing story. And, you know, we tend to get, oh yes, this was a question. I shouldn't be doing this. It's not going to do good for the continuity of the video. But this one was here. A couple of weeks ago, I was thinking, why did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? I mean, it didn't make any sense to me. So I did a search on YouTube. Sure enough, I found a documentary. And now I know why the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And all my notes are here and the different characters that were involved. That kind of led me down the road of the samurai. So I've got notes on the samurai here. And it's just an amazing, what I'm collecting here is an amazing resource of information on things that I've had at some point an interest in. And that's the key thing with a Commonplace notebook. It needs to be random. You don't want to be organizing it so that you've got sections for different topics. The randomness is what actually gives it its power, because your brain works on a much, much higher level than any computer's brain is ever going to do. Computers are, first of all, programmed by human beings with their own biases, as we've discovered recently. And also, though, computers are only looking at logical connections. But your brain doesn't work that way. Your brain works at a much higher level, at an illogical way. And it's how it makes connections. It's how we ended up with the Renaissance, because people like Galileo, Leonardo da Vinci, Copernicus, all these people, they had these basically notebooks, Commonplace notebooks. And they, over 20, 30, 40 years, they collected information that they just had interest in at some point in their lives. But then later, maybe 10 or 15 years later, they went back through those notebooks and were able to make connections that they didn't see at the time that they collected the notes. Now, as I say, these notebooks here, this particular notebook, I tend to think of as my interview notebook, because this is all the interviews that I've done. And I've got a load of stuff. There's a quote here by Alan Watts on the meaning of life. If you want to know, it's just to be alive. It's so plain and simple. But I have all sorts of stuff in here. I've noticed the name Aristotle is in here. It's just unbelievable what I actually collect by just listening to interviews on podcasts late at night. It helps me to wind down. It gets me away from a computer screen, although yes, I admit I'm watching a TV screen. However, not just TVs. When I'm reading books, so here's the one that I've read recently on the daily rituals, a book I highly recommend because it's the daily rituals of some amazing people. I can also, if I'm reading the Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which is not an easy book to read. However, that said, I can get ideas and they can go into my common notebook. Now, sure, I could buy this on Amazon and do it that way and highlight notes, but I never found I was going through digital notes. And this is something that I want to do to collect for the long-term future. You know, I could take this book on vacation with me and sit by a pool and just read through all the notes that I've had. In a situation where I'm relaxed, I can just go through them. Now, let's look at some mechanics here about what kind of book you want to use. Now, this Midori Traveler's Notebook, the paper that comes with this is fantastic. It's Japanese paper, so it works brilliantly with fountain pens. And today's fountain pen, by the way, is a Conway Stewart Duke of Wellington, which I've had for about 12 years. It's got a huge 18-karat gold nib on it. It was stupidly expensive. I must have been feeling maybe a little bit depressed or something when I bought this, because I tend to spend stupid amounts of money on pens when I'm not feeling happy. But this actually is a wonderful pen, and I actually use this for collecting quick ideas on my scratch pad. But there you go. That's today's pen, a Conway Stewart Duke of Wellington in marbled green. Anyway, going back to the notebooks. These Midori Traveler's Notebooks are great. Now, they do them in two sizes. This is the regular size, and they also have a passport size. And you can get lots of different inserts. So one of the things I'm aware of is that when this particular notebook fills up, I can take it out and replace it with a new one, and these can go into a bookshelf or something like that. Fantastic. Beginning of this year, I decided for just the regular documentaries that I watched, I would use just a regular A5 hardcover, because I don't have a table when I'm watching these. I'm just sitting on the sofa, so I want something hard that I can write on. This is an Endless notebook. It's made by Endless. I don't know its actual proper name. I think it does have a name. The thing is, the great thing about this is it does have a table of contents at the beginning, so it's right there. And as I'm watching these videos, if I have a few minutes at the end of in the morning or something, I will update the index. It's not something I'm doing all the time. The problem I've found with this particular notebook is it's not great fountain pen friendly paper. It makes the lines a little bit too big. So if you're using a fine nib, it's going to look like a medium nib in here. If you're using a medium nib, it's going to look like a broad nib. You know, if that's okay with you, then this is fine. It doesn't bleed very much at all. However, this arrived this morning, which is a Rhodia Web notebook. Again, it's hardback and it's in A5. Now, the reason I've chosen this one is simply because A, I can get it in blue. So if you've noticed the common thread here, there's blue, blue, blue. It's my favorite color. But the great thing about this particular notebook is Rhodia paper is probably some of the best you can get for fountain pens. It's hardback, it's a faux leather cover. But the great thing about this is when I'm sat on the sofa, it's lined. I'd prefer lined for this. And although it doesn't have an index and it doesn't have page numbers, that's not too much of a problem because it's not that difficult to write page numbers in as I go along. But these are great, and I love my Rhodia paper. And so this will be, when this is filled, which will probably be in the next 3 or 4 weeks, this will be the next Commonplace notebook. But like I say, I'm not into all the fancy design, and you can go crazy with stuff like this. I'm not into that sort of thing. I'm just collecting notes from the videos that I watch late at night. I've watched quite a few on minimalism. I've watched quite a few on slow living recently. You know, all that information goes in here. So eventually, maybe in a few months' time, I might be doing videos on slow living. Who knows? But all the information I'm collecting in these notebooks are just fantastic, because maybe I'm not going to look through them until 10 years later. But because they're hardback, I can put them into a bookshelf like I have behind me, and I'm collecting information on the things that I really enjoy at that moment. It's like stages of my life. Plus, and as I say, it's one of the greatest things you can do if you spent all day in front of a computer, is just going back to old school with a notebook and a pen and just letting your brain just doodle and write and do whatever you want. It's great fun. You will not regret it. And it's something that I strongly recommend that you try doing. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about how I'm using paper this year, particularly my, as I call my planning book, then this video up here is the video to watch next.